Rain bled across the cracked asphalt as Elena curled beside a dumpster, clutching her bruised belly. "Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt," she whispered to the shadow looming over her. But instead of another blow, a cold hand lifted her chin. Black suit, blood on his cuff, and eyes like winter steel. He wasn't a savior. He was the devil of Verona, the mafia boss everyone feared. Why did he kneel beside a nobody like her? And why did his gaze tremble as if her pain reminded him of something he'd buried long ago? Rain dripped from the diner's rusted sign, each droplet echoing like a slow heartbeat against the cracked pavement. Inside, the smell of burnt oil and coffee clung to Elena's uniform. Her back ached, her feet swollen from another double shift. The baby kicked weakly under her ribs, a small reminder that she wasn't entirely alone, even if the world had long decided to forget her. "Customers complaining again?" barked her boss from behind the counter. "Smile or get out." She forced a smile and returned to the man in the booth, the kind who looked at women like her as easy prey. His hand brushed her hip as she set down his plate. She froze. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, trembling. The man smirked, leaning closer. "Then don't tempt me." Her hand moved before she could think. The coffee cup crashed against his sleeve, spilling heat and fury across the table. He shouted, standing up, but before she could breathe, her boss stormed over. "You're done, Elena. Get out of my place." Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled into the night, clutching her torn bag. The air was sharp, the streets slick with rain. She pulled her thin coat tighter, whispering, "Just one more night. Please." But fate had other plans, a voice called from behind her. The same man from the diner. "You owe me, sweetheart." His drunken laughter filled the alley. She turned, backing away, one hand protectively on her belly. He advanced, eyes wild, reeking of whiskey. When he grabbed her arm, she screamed, "Please, don't!" Her plea was swallowed by the roar of engines. Headlights slashed through the darkness. 3 black cars slid to a stop, doors swinging open in one smooth, terrifying motion. Men in suits poured out, guns gleaming under the streetlights. The drunk staggered back, stammering. Then he appeared. Luca Romano stepped from the car like a storm in human form, tall, composed, his presence cutting through chaos. His suit was black as midnight, his expression unreadable. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. One word, cold and precise, froze everyone in place. "Enough!" The thug dropped to his knees, trembling. Luca's gaze flicked to Elena, soaked, shaking, clutching her belly like it was the last thing she had. For a heartbeat, something unreadable passed across his face. Pain? Recognition? Then he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric smelled of smoke and expensive cologne. Warmth bled into her skin, dizzying after the cold. Her lips parted, wanting to speak, to ask who he was. But the world tilted. The rain blurred into a silver haze as her knees buckled. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. She felt the weight of his arms, the steadiness of his chest, and the last thing she heard was his low voice murmuring something in Italian. A command. Maybe. Or a prayer. Then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, it wasn't the alley she saw. It was marble ceilings, velvet curtains, and the metallic glint of guns at every corner. Men in black stood like statues watching her, her breath hitched. Where was she? And why did the devil's coat still cover her shoulders? Soft light filtered through curtains the color of blood and gold. Elena blinked, disoriented, her body sinking into silk sheets that smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. The air was too still, too clean. A crystal chandelier shimmered above her, scattering reflections like shards of ice. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't a hospital. It wasn't anywhere she'd ever been. A quiet knock came before the door creaked open. A woman in a black uniform entered, her head bowed. "You're awake, signorina," she whispered in a thick accent. "Please don't move too much. The doctor says rest is best for you and the child." Elena clutched the blanket to her chest. "Where am I?" The maid hesitated. "Don Romano's private estate." The name struck like a blow. She'd heard it whispered in the diner, the way people spoke of death. Soft, careful, afraid. "I need to go," Elena said, forcing herself to sit up. The maid's eyes darted toward the door. "No one leaves here without his permission." The words drained the warmth from the room. Elena's hands trembled as she touched her stomach, whispering to the life inside her, "We'll find a way, I promise." Outside the door, voices rose, angry, sharp. Men arguing in Italian. She froze, listening. The shipment's gone. Someone tipped them off. The girl, she was there, Luca. Maybe she saw something. Her heart pounded. They were talking about her. Footsteps thundered closer. The door opened. He entered. Luca Romano filled the room like a storm. Dark suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up. His calm was more dangerous than rage. His gaze found her instantly, pinning her in place. Elena's throat went dry. He was every inch the devil they said he was. Too beautiful to be human, too quiet to be safe. What did you see last night? His voice was low even, but it carried the weight of command. Nothing, she stammered. I didn't see anything. I was just trying to protect myself. He studied her face, searching for lies. Then his gaze drifted downward, pausing on the curve of her swollen belly. Something flickered in his expression. Not pity, but something gentler, fleeting as a ghost. You're pregnant, he said softly, almost to himself. She nodded, her eyes glistening. Please, I don't want trouble. I'll leave. You'll never see me again. He took a slow step closer. That's not how this works. Her breath hitched. Are you going to kill me? Luca tilted his head, considering her. Then he turned toward the doorway where two men stood waiting, armed and expressionless. Get the doctor, he ordered. Make sure she and the baby are fine. Elena stared, unable to believe what she'd heard. Luca's voice dropped colder now. Until I say otherwise, she stays alive. The door shut behind him, leaving the faint scent of his cologne and a silence heavy enough to crush her. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. The doctor came and went, polite but distant. The maid brought soup Elena couldn't eat. Every sound in the mansion, footsteps, muffled voices, distant doors, made her flinch. When night fell, the room seemed to shrink around her. Shadows deepened on the walls. The rain started again, whispering against the windows like a warning. Elena lay awake, her mind racing. Who was this man, really? Why spare her? And how long until he changed his mind? She reached for the coat draped at the foot of the bed, the one he'd wrapped around her in the alley. It was too big, too heavy, but it still carried warmth. His warmth, her eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling her down. Just as sleep began to take her, a sound slipped through the door, a voice. Low, male, close. She won't live through morning. Her eyes flew open. The room went deathly still. The clock ticked past midnight, each second stretching thin as wire. Elena sat against the far wall, knees pulled to her chest, her breath shallow in the velvet dark room. The echo of that voice, she won't live through morning, wouldn't leave her. Every creak of the old mansion sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the lamp, then stopped halfway. Light would give her away. She listened, the faint shuffle of boots outside, the whisper of metal against wood. Someone was there. The door handle turned. Her heart lurched. She pressed herself into the corner, one hand cradling her stomach. The latch clicked, then gunfire, a scream cut short. Wood splintered. A body crashed against the floor. Silence swallowed everything. Elena couldn't move. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the air, thick and metallic. A shadow crossed the doorway. And then he was there. Luca Romano, eyes blazing, a pistol in one hand and a bleeding man dragging behind him like a broken doll. Blood streaked the marble, bright as rubies in the low light. He threw the body aside, his voice raw with fury. They came for you. Elena pressed herself tighter into the corner, shaking. For me? Her voice cracked. Why? Luca's jaw clenched. Because one of my own men sold your name. Said the girl was a witness. Said killing you would clean the trail. His breath came harsh and uneven, his shirt dark with another man's blood. They were wrong. He turned, punching the wall so hard the glass-framed painting shattered. Shards scattered across the floor. I trusted him, he hissed. He grew up in this house. Elena wanted to speak, to say something, anything. But her voice was gone. She could only stare at the lifeless hand lying inches from her bare feet. Blood crept closer, curling into the folds of her nightgown. Please, she whispered. Don't let it touch me. Luca looked at her then, really looked. The fear in her eyes broke something in him. His expression softened, the fury dimming like embers in rain. He knelt beside her, careful not to touch her too quickly. "You're safe now," he murmured. The words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like a vow. His hand, still stained with red, hovered near her shoulder, steady for a moment, then trembling. She noticed it. The tremor was small, almost invisible, but it wasn't the first time she'd seen it. The same shaking she'd felt in herself the night she lost everything, when grief and fear blurred into one ache too heavy to name. He drew back quickly, flexing his fingers as if ashamed of the weakness. Elena's voice returned in a whisper. "You could have let them kill me." "I don't let anyone take what's mine," he said simply, though something softer threaded through the words, guilt, or maybe confusion. "And now, you are under my protection." Her pulse raced. Protection in his world sounded a lot like captivity. The corridor outside was chaos. Shouts, boots thundering, more guns being loaded. He stood, snapping orders in Italian, his voice slicing through the panic like a blade. The other men obeyed instantly, dragging the body away, cleaning the mess, pretending nothing had happened. When the room was quiet again, Luca turned back to her. His face had hardened again, but his eyes, dark, sleepless eyes, betrayed something else. He stepped closer. "From now on," he said, his tone low, final, "you'll stay close to me." Elena swallowed. "Close to you?" "Whether you like it or not." The door slammed behind him, leaving her in silence, the echo of gunfire still humming in her bones, and his scent, smoke, steel, and something heartbreakingly human, still in the air. Sunlight spilled through tall arched windows, turning the marble floors into rivers of gold. Elena hesitated at the edge of the great dining hall, her fingers twisting in the fabric of the borrowed dress. It was pale blue, delicate, soft, too beautiful for a woman who still remembered sleeping beside a dumpster 2 nights ago. 2 guards flanked her, their faces unreadable. The clink of cutlery and the low hum of voices fell silent as she entered. At the long table sat men and women dressed in silk and power, Luca's family, his inner circle. Their gazes cut through her like knives wrapped in polite smiles. Luca sat at the head, perfectly composed, his expression a mask of calm authority. He gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "Sit," he said simply. Her legs barely carried her forward. She felt their eyes, their whispers, their judgment. Who is she? Why is she here? As she sat, the smell of roasted coffee and baked bread mixed with the tension in the air. A woman with diamond earrings leaned toward another, murmuring, "Another stray he's taken in." A man further down chuckled. "He's getting sentimental." Elena stared at her plate, too nervous to eat. Luca's voice broke through the murmurs. "This is Elena," he announced, his tone leaving no room for curiosity. "She's a guest in my home." "You'll treat her as such." Silence followed. Even the air seemed to freeze. Then, quietly, everyone returned to their meals, but the whispers didn't stop. Elena forced herself to lift her cup, though her hands trembled. When she dared a glance at Luca, she caught him studying her, not with warmth, but with something deeper, unreadable. He looked away first. From her right, a soft voice whispered, "Don't let them see you're scared." Elena turned. A girl no older than 18 smiled faintly at her. Brown curls, green eyes full of mischief and empathy. "I'm Isabella," she said. "Luca's sister," Elena blinked, startled. "You're his—" "Yes," Isabella said, lowering her voice. "And before you ask, no, I don't usually talk to his guests. But you're different." They talked quietly as the meal continued, hidden beneath the low murmur of conversation. Isabella's laughter was a gentle rebellion against the coldness of the room. She asked about Elena's baby, about her favorite foods, even about the weather, trying to make her smile. Then her tone changed. "Do you know why my brother brought you here?" Elena hesitated. "He said I was in danger." A soft sigh escaped Isabella's lips. "Danger follows him, not you." "He doesn't save people, Elena. He buries them." The words chilled her. "Then why am I still alive?" Isabella looked down at her plate, the silver spoon trembling slightly in her hand. "Because once he couldn't save the ones who mattered." Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" The young girl leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. "He had a wife. She was pregnant. They were killed in a car explosion 5 years ago, planted by a rival family. Luca never talks about it, but he hasn't forgiven himself. Sometimes I think he's looking for ghosts in every broken woman he finds. The world seemed to still around them. Elena's pulse quickened, her throat tight. You think that's why he kept me here? She whispered. Because I remind him of her? Isabella gave a sad smile. Maybe, or maybe he's just trying to rewrite a story he couldn't finish. Across the table, Luca rose, ending the meal with a curt nod. Everyone stood instantly. He glanced toward Elena once more, his gaze softer than before. Fleeting, but enough to make her heart stumble. Then he turned and left through the grand double doors, his men following like shadows. The hall emptied. Only the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the marble corridors. Elena remained seated, her mind a whirl of questions she wasn't brave enough to ask. Isabella touched her hand gently before standing. If he's protecting you, she murmured, eyes dark with warning, it's not out of kindness. She paused at the doorway, her voice turning to a whisper. It's out of guilt. The sky was the color of bruised steel when the convoy of black cars rolled toward the docks. Wind whipped through the air, carrying salt, smoke, and the faint tang of diesel. Elena sat in the back seat beside Luca, her hands folded tightly over her lap. Every turn of the tires made her stomach twist tighter. She had begged to stay behind. But he'd only said, "You're safer where I can see you." Now, staring out at the endless stretch of ocean and shadowy men unloading crates. She wasn't sure if he'd brought her to safety or straight into hell. The docks were alive with motion. Ships groaning. Seagulls shrieking, men shouting orders in Italian. The smell of gunmetal mixed with the sea breeze. Luca stepped out first, tall and calm, his tailored coat billowing like a dark flag. His men spread out instantly, forming a protective ring around them. He turned and offered her his hand. She hesitated before taking it. His palm was warm, steady, and she hated how her pulse betrayed her. Stay close, he said quietly. Don't speak. Don't look afraid, she almost laughed. Don't look afraid? The wind carried his voice away, and still she tried to stand straighter. They walked together toward the end of the pier, where another group of men waited, strangers with sharp eyes and colder smiles. It was a deal, she realized, a meeting of devils pretending to be civilized. Luca spoke little, his tone like velvet over steel, smooth but deadly. He discussed shipments, territory, alliances, words that tasted like danger. But between every sentence, his hand brushed hers, as if to remind her she was still there, still real. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, slicing through the air like glass. One of Luca's men moved to cover him with an umbrella, but Luca shook his head and instead shrugged off his coat, draping it around Elena's shoulders. The gesture was simple, unthinking, yet it burned through her like fire. You'll catch cold, he murmured. And you? She asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. He only turned back to the men waiting before him, his gaze turning to ice. A heartbeat later, everything exploded. Gunfire cracked through the rain. Screams, chaos, men hit the ground. The metallic stench of blood flooded the air. Elena froze, her scream caught in her throat. Luca spun, grabbing her arm and pulling her down behind a stack of cargo crates as bullets sliced the air. Stay down! His voice was a snarl, sharp with command. She pressed herself to the ground, trembling. The noise was unbearable. The sea roaring, guns firing, men shouting in Italian. Through the chaos, she saw him move, precise, lethal. Every motion was instinct, a dance of survival. He returned fire, taking down 2 men before a third bullet found him. The sound tore through her. Luca! He staggered, clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and hot. Without thinking, she crawled toward him, her knees scraping against the wet concrete. Let me see, she cried. Please, let me— Stay back, he growled, but his strength was already faltering. Ignoring him, she tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound, her hands shaking. His blood coated her fingers, warm and terrifying. You're bleeding too much. You have to stop moving. His gaze locked on hers, sharp, burning. The world narrowed to the space between them. Rain fell harder, soaking them both, but she didn't care. Her tears mingled with the rain, her breath breaking as she tried to keep pressure on the wound. You should have run, he whispered hoarsely. She shook her head, desperate. I couldn't leave you. A faint, broken smile touched his lips, the kind that looked like it hurt to make. Foolish woman, he murmured. His hand brushed her cheek, blood-stained fingers trembling. You should have run when you had the chance. A shout rang out in the distance. Reinforcements or death, she couldn't tell. But Luca's head tilted toward the sound, his expression unreadable, and Elena's heart pounded with the dawning fear that the storm was only beginning. The storm outside had finally died, but inside Luca's chamber, another raged. Elena sat at his bedside, a damp cloth in hand, the faint scent of antiseptic and smoke clinging to the air. Luca tossed beneath the silk sheets, his usually composed face drawn and pale. Fever burned through him, sweat beading on his temple as the doctor's words echoed in her mind. The bullet missed his artery by inches. He should have been dead. Hold the cloth to his head, Isabella had whispered earlier, leaving her alone in the room. He doesn't let anyone near him when he's like this. Not even me. Now it was just Elena, and the sound of Luca's uneven breathing. She dipped the cloth again, squeezing cool water between trembling fingers before pressing it gently to his forehead. His skin was hot, almost searing. "Shh," she whispered softly, brushing his damp hair back. "You need to rest. You're safe." But his body jerked beneath her touch. His lips moved, words tangled with pain. Lucia. The name struck her like a blade. She froze, her hand hovering midair. He said it again, weaker this time. Lucia, his wife, the ghost that still lived in every corner of his soul. Elena swallowed hard. She had heard the whispers from the staff, the tragic love, the explosion, the unborn child taken with her. It all made sense now. The guarded eyes, the coldness, the tenderness he couldn't admit. He wasn't saving her. He was saving a memory. Her chest ached. She should have pulled away. She should have left the room. But something in his broken whisper held her there. He turned toward her suddenly, his hand shooting out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Lucia," he rasped, then blinked, confusion flashing behind fevered eyes. "No, you're not." Elena leaned closer, her voice trembling. "It's me, Luca. You're safe. Rest now." His grip tightened. "You're not her," he murmured, his voice raw, cracked with memory. "But you make the silence bearable." Her breath caught. The air between them thickened, electric with unspoken pain. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The walls that separated them, grief, guilt, power, all blurred for one fragile moment. Her heart betrayed her before her mind could stop it. She reached up and cupped his cheek, feeling the stubble rough against her palm. "Sleep," she whispered, though her voice shook. "Please." His eyes fluttered closed, lashes damp with sweat. He exhaled, slow and heavy, as if surrendering to something deeper than exhaustion. His hand still held hers, weak now, but unwilling to let go. Elena stayed beside him through the night. The grandfather clock ticked like a heartbeat. Shadows from the candlelight swayed across the room, graceful, haunting. Every time he stirred, she was there, changing the cloth, whispering comfort she didn't believe she had the right to give. "Why am I doing this?" she wondered. "He's everything I should fear. And yet, I can't leave him." Hours passed before his fever began to break. His breathing steadied, his brow relaxed. Relief washed through her like warmth after a storm. Outside, dawn began to rise, pale light slipping through the heavy curtains. She leaned back in the chair, exhaustion weighing her down. Her eyes closed for just a second. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. Then, a faint sound, a click. Soft, metallic, familiar. Elena's eyes snapped open. She turned her head toward the door, her pulse racing. Through the narrow crack beneath it, a shadow shifted. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. She stood, her heart thundering in her chest. "Hello?" she whispered. No response. The doorknob twitched, just barely. Lucas stirred, half conscious. "Elena?" he murmured, voice thick with sleep. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling him to stay silent, though she knew he was too weak to rise. Her gaze darted to the small tray beside the bed, a glass, a metal spoon. Nothing useful. The shadow moved again. Closer. Another click. The sound of a pistol being armed. Silenced. Deadly. Elena's breath caught. Her fingers curled around the nearest object, the glass of water. Her mind screamed run, but her body wouldn't move. The door handle began to turn, and then... silence. Pure, suffocating silence. The only thing she could hear was Luca's ragged breathing behind her and the faint scrape of metal against the lock. Someone was out there. Waiting. The first shot cracked the night like thunder. Elena jolted upright, the sound tearing through the fragile calm of Luca's recovery room. For one dizzy second, she thought it was a dream. Then came the second shot, closer, sharper, followed by the splintering crash of glass. The mansion's alarms screamed to life, red lights flashing across the walls. Her pulse surged. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, the baby's weight pressing down on her ribs as chaos erupted beyond the door. Men shouted orders, boots pounded marble, gunfire echoed in overlapping bursts. "Elena, stay down," a voice yelled outside, but she couldn't tell if it was friend or foe. She dropped to her knees, crawling behind the heavy dining table as shouts grew louder. The air reeked of smoke and gunpowder. A window shattered above her, raining down shards that glittered like broken stars. She covered her head, breathing hard. Not now, please, not now. The baby kicked, as if sensing her fear. Outside, Luca's voice cut through the chaos, rough, commanding, alive with fury. "Sweep the east wing! Don't let anyone near her!" Elena pressed her hand to her belly, trembling. She could hear him, closer now, somewhere down the hall, barking orders like the world was ending. Then, the unmistakable rhythm of boots drawing nearer. She peeked out from under the table just as the door burst open. A masked man stormed in, rifle raised. Her breath caught. He didn't see her. Not yet. His attention was fixed on the doorway behind him, the roar of battle outside. His gun swung left, then right. Elena tried to make herself smaller, her pulse thundering in her ears. The man turned toward her side of the room. His eyes flicked over the overturned chair, the curtains, She didn't think. She grabbed a fallen vase and hurled it across the floor. It smashed against the opposite wall with a crash. The man spun toward the sound, and in that instant, Luca appeared in the doorway like a storm. 2 gunshots, 1 heartbeat. The masked man collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. "Elena," Luca's voice cracked with panic. Nothing like the cold control he usually wore. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kicking the gun away before kneeling beside her. She could barely breathe. I didn't mean to. Don't talk." His eyes scanned her quickly, his hand hovering near her belly without daring to touch. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as he lifted her gently from the floor. For once, his touch wasn't careful because of who she was. It was desperate, as if letting go might mean losing everything. Blood streaked his sleeve, soaking into his shirt. He didn't seem to notice. "Stay with me," he muttered, half to her, half to himself. "Don't you dare close your eyes." As he carried her through the hallway, gunfire echoed on both sides. His men shouted, returning fire, their boots slipping on the marble now slick with blood. Elena clung to his shirt, her face pressed against his shoulder. Every shot made her flinch. They reached the grand hall, a war zone of shattered chandeliers and burning drapes. The once opulent space now reeked of smoke and iron. Luca set her down behind a marble column, crouching in front of her. "Stay here. Don't move. I'll end this." She grabbed his wrist before he could rise. "You're bleeding." His eyes softened for just a heartbeat. "It's nothing." Then he turned, firing down the corridor. 2 attackers fell. Another ducked behind the staircase. She wanted to scream, to tell him not to go, but the words stuck in her throat. The sound of war drowned everything else. Minutes blurred, and then silence. Luca returned, chest heaving, his shirt torn and soaked through. His men dragged bodies toward the door, their faces grim. "It's over," he said, more breath than voice. Elena exhaled shakily, tears cutting lines through the dust on her face. She watched him. The man who had once terrified her now standing guard like a wounded lion. He turned toward her, eyes meeting hers. For the first time she saw it. Not the dawn, not the beast, but the man. His hand found her cheek, trembling slightly. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. Before she could answer, a shout echoed from the foyer. One of his men, bleeding, barely standing, staggered into view. "Boss!" He coughed, spitting red onto the floor. They're all dead, but..." He choked on his breath, collapsing to his knees. Luca grabbed him, shaking him. "But what?" The dying man's voice rasped through the smoke. They said you're traitor." Luca's grip tightened. "What traitor?" The man's lips twisted into a final broken smile. "Your traitor sleeps inside your walls." His head dropped forward, lifeless. The hall fell silent, except for the faint, fragile sound of Elena's breath catching in her throat. Luca looked up slowly, his eyes dark as midnight, scanning the faces of his men. Someone inside had betrayed him. And Elena suddenly realized she was inside those same walls. Morning came, but it brought no peace. The Romano estate was still, but not silent. The kind of quiet that follows a storm and hides another one coming. The bodies were gone, the blood scrubbed from marble floors, yet the air still carried the metallic taste of betrayal. Elena sat at the edge of the long table in the dining hall, untouched food before her, eyes darting to every passing shadow. She could feel the tension, like invisible wires tightening around everyone's throat. Luca's men stood in lines, bruised, blood-stained, waiting for his judgment. At the far end of the room, Luca paced with slow, measured steps. His shirt was black, his expression unreadable, but the fury beneath his calm made every man flinch. "Someone opened my gates," he said quietly, voice like a blade sliding from its sheath. "Someone fed them my routes, my codes, my security lines." Silence. He stopped walking, gaze sweeping over them like a storm scanning a field of grass. "Whoever it was, I'll find you before sunset." Elena swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't supposed to be there, but Luca hadn't sent her away. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he wanted her to see what he truly was. Hours passed. The hall turned into an interrogation chamber. One man at a time, Luca questioned his soldiers. Calm at first, then colder, sharper, until his patience thinned like paper on fire. Each denial was met with silence. Each plea met his unblinking stare. And then, finally, a crack. A trembling soldier fell to his knees, eyes darting toward the upper balcony. "It wasn't me," he stammered. "It was Matteo, Isabella's fiancé. He took money from the Fiores. I saw him meet them by the docks last week." Gasps rippled through the hall. Luca froze. For a heartbeat, no one dared breathe. Isabella's voice, fragile and breaking, came from behind them. "You're lying," Elena turned. The girl stood in the doorway, pale as marble, her hair unbound, nightgown still damp from tears. The soldier shook his head. "I swear." "Bring him," Luca ordered. 2 guards dragged Matteo into the room moments later. His face swollen, shirt torn, fear clinging to him like sweat. Luca stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You sold my family to the Fiores." Matteo's lips trembled. I had no choice." "They had my brother." "You had a choice," Luca interrupted, voice barely human now. "You could have come to me." "Would you have spared him?" Matteo cried. "Would you have spared anyone?" The hall held its breath. Isabella ran forward, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Luca, please, he's my fiancé." Luca's jaw clenched. His hand went to his holster. "No." Isabella sobbed, falling to her knees. "He made a mistake. He didn't mean for anyone to die." The sound of her voice cracked through him like thunder splitting stone. For a long, terrible moment, Luca stood still, gun half drawn. His eyes glistened with something Elena couldn't name. Fury, grief, restraint, all tangled together. Finally, he exhaled. The gun lowered. "Take him to the cellar," he said, voice hoarse. "He'll answer for this after dawn." The guards dragged Matteo away, his cries echoing through the marble corridors until only silence remained. Luca didn't move. He stood there, still as a statue, watching his sister crumble. Elena's chest tightened. His restraint had cost him more than blood ever could. By nightfall, the mansion slept uneasily. Elena couldn't. She walked through dim corridors lit by trembling candlelight until she found him in the chapel at the far end of the east wing. The heavy doors were ajar. Inside, candles flickered across rows of empty pews. Luca knelt before the altar, his head bowed, hands clasped like a man praying for something he didn't believe in. The moonlight fell through stained glass, painting fractured colors across his face. "Luca," she whispered. He didn't turn. His voice was barely a breath. She looked at me like I was the monster who killed him. Elena took a slow step forward. "You didn't kill anyone tonight." His jaw tightened. "Not yet." She hesitated, then moved closer. The air between them felt fragile, heavy with the scent of candle wax and gun oil. "I lost control once," he said quietly. "The night Lucia died. I swore I'd never lose it again, not even for justice." He finally looked at her, eyes hollow, burning. "But when he touched her hand, I almost did." Elena's throat ached. She wanted to comfort him, but there were no words that could touch wounds that deep. So she did the only thing she could. She reached out. Her hand brushed his shoulder, trembling. His breath hitched, like he hadn't been touched in years. "Luca," she said softly, "you're not a monster." He turned toward her then, slow and unguarded. The shadows softened around his face, the weight of his grief carving tenderness where rage had lived. Her heart thudded painfully. She should have stepped back. She didn't. For a long second, neither moved. Their eyes locked, the world outside fading. And then he leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, breath warm, uneven. "Elena," he murmured, as if saying her name could keep him from breaking. His hand rose, fingers tracing the edge of her jaw, and before either could stop it, his lips found hers, a kiss born not of passion but of pain, of loneliness, of something too fragile to name. She didn't pull away. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. The days that followed blurred like half-remembered dreams, quiet, trembling moments built on danger and desire. Elena moved through the Romano mansion as though walking a line between two worlds. One was gilded in silk, where Luca's presence shadowed every hallway, where his men bowed at her passing. The other was dark, humming beneath the surface, a world of secrets, guns, and glances that said too much. Something had changed since that night in the chapel. Luca wasn't the same. He still commanded with steel in his voice. But now when his eyes met hers, there was something else there. Hesitation, hunger, and guilt all woven into one impossible emotion. He began joining her for breakfast. His chair always slightly turned toward her, his questions quiet and deliberate. "Are you eating enough? Is the baby restless?" His tone was firm, but his gaze softened at the smallest sign of discomfort. Sometimes he would linger too long. A brush of fingers as he handed her a cup. A shadow of a smile that faded as quickly as it came. It terrified her, not because of what he was, but because of what he made her feel. The staff noticed. So did his men. Rumors moved like smoke through the estate. Whispers in corners, half-glances in hallways. The pregnant woman. The boss's weakness. Elena tried not to hear them, but they followed her everywhere. She found herself standing at her window one morning, watching the guards train in the courtyard, the baby kicking faintly beneath her palm. She told herself she should run, while she still could. But then she remembered his voice, low and rough, saying her name like it mattered. Elena. It had been the way he said it that night, not as an order, not as a question, as if he'd found something worth holding on to. That memory alone had anchored her to this gilded cage. Later that afternoon, he found her in the library, seated among books she couldn't focus on. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the lines of power into something dangerously human. "You shouldn't be alone here," he said, stopping by the armchair. She met his gaze. "I'm safer than I've ever been, aren't I?" His lips twitched into a wry smile. "Safety is a myth, Elena, especially around me." He reached down, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. The touch was fleeting, but it left a trail of warmth that made her heart betray her. "Why do you look at me like that?" She whispered, "Like what?" Like you're afraid to breathe too close. He hesitated, his eyes darkening. Because I am. Their silence said the rest. Everything they couldn't admit. Everything they wanted to. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts tangled with his words, her pulse echoing in her ears. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, his hand reaching for hers, the firelight flickering between them. It wasn't supposed to be this way. She wasn't supposed to feel safe in his arms, or see gentleness in the man who ruled fear. But she did, and it scared her more than gunfire ever could. The following morning, she walked into the courtyard and saw him training with his men, shirt sleeves rolled up, movements sharp and precise. He looked powerful, lethal, untouchable. Yet when he turned and saw her watching, something flickered in his eyes. He lowered his weapon. "You shouldn't be out in the sun," he called. She smiled faintly. "Then bring me shade." He froze, caught off guard by the tease, then laughed, quiet and low. It was the first time she'd heard it, and in that sound, she realized something devastating. She didn't want to escape anymore. By evening, the tension between them had shifted into something neither could name. The air seemed to hum when he passed near her. Even silence felt like touch. They dined together in uneasy peace, the kind that held more emotion than words could carry. His gaze lingered. Hers dropped too quickly. When she stood to leave, he rose too. "Elena!" She turned back, heart hammering. He didn't finish. Instead, he reached out, brushing her hand, barely touching. But in that small contact, there was everything. Apology, fear, longing. Her lips parted, words dying before they could form. And then, the spell shattered. A phone rang, sharp, urgent. Luca's body went rigid. He turned toward the nearest guard. "Answer it." The man hesitated, then handed the phone to him with shaking hands. Luca pressed it to his ear. "Romano." The voice on the other end was frantic, muffled by static. A man's voice, breathless. Elena watched his expression change. Confusion, disbelief, then pure rage. "What did you say?" His voice dropped to a whisper, deadly calm. The line crackled. Luca's jaw tightened. His hand clenched around the phone until his knuckles whitened. When he spoke again, his tone was ice. "Find out where. Now." He slammed the phone onto the table, the sound echoing through the hall. Elena's heart raced. "Luca, what happened?" He turned to her slowly, eyes cold and burning at once. "They've taken Isabella." The room seemed to tilt, and for the first time since she'd met him, Elena saw something in Luca's eyes that terrified her more than violence ever could. Fear. The mansion had never felt colder. Luca stood at the head of the war table. Maps and dossiers spread out before him, every inch of his control stretched thin. His men watched in silence as his temper flared and ebbed like a tide of fire barely restrained. "They want her?" he asked again, though he already knew the answer. One of his lieutenants nodded, voice low. "Yes, Don. They demand the woman, the one you've been protecting. In exchange, they'll release your sister unharmed." The words hung heavy in the air. Elena stood outside the doorway, her hand pressed against the wall, heart hammering. She hadn't meant to overhear. She'd only come to ask if he'd eaten, foolishly tender in the middle of a war. But now every syllable pierced her chest like shrapnel. "They know she matters to you," another voice said. "That's why they're using her." Luca's hand slammed down on the table. "She's not part of this world." "She is now," came the quiet reply. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain against the windows, the soft hum of a ticking clock. Elena could almost picture him, head bowed, eyes burning, torn between fury and despair. The man who could command armies undone by love and blood. Finally, his voice low and unyielding. "We don't negotiate with filth. Prepare the men. We'll take Isabella back at my way," her breath caught. My way meant violence, meant death, and maybe Isabella wouldn't survive the rescue. She pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a sob. He wouldn't trade her, not because she wasn't worth it, but because she was worth too much. That was the cruelest mercy. Hours later, the mansion was alive with preparation, men shouting, engines roaring to life. Luca was in the armory, loading magazines, his movements sharp, mechanical. Elena watched from the shadows of the hall, her hand resting over her belly. The child kicked softly as if sensing her decision. She knew what she had to do. Love, she realized, wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was sacrifice dressed in silence. She slipped away quietly, leaving behind the warmth of the only safety she'd ever known. No one saw her steal the keys from the guard station. No one noticed her slip out the back gate, rain soaking her coat within seconds. By the time the guards discovered the missing vehicle, Elena's car was already tearing through the night toward the industrial docks, toward the place the enemy had chosen for the exchange. The warehouse loomed at the edge of the river, a decaying skeleton of rust and shadows. She parked the car out of sight, her hands shaking as she stepped into the downpour. Her shoes sank into the mud, her breath clouding in the cold air. Each step forward felt like walking into the jaws of fate. Inside, the world smelled of oil and death. Men gathered near flickering floodlights, guns slung across their shoulders, laughter sharp and cruel. The moment she entered, the room went still. "Well, well," a voice drawled. "The princess arrives after all?" Elena looked up. The man who stepped forward was broad-shouldered, his smile slick with arrogance. She recognized him from Luca's dossiers, Enzo Fiore, the rival boss. Her heart pounded, but she forced her voice steady. "I'm here for Isabella," Enzo smirked. So the rumors were true. Luca Romano's heart beats for a waitress. A pregnant one, no less. Laughter rippled through the room. Elena didn't flinch. "You said if I came, you'd let her go." He clapped slowly, mock applause echoing off steel walls. "Oh, I will, eventually." The men closed in around her. One snatched the gun from her coat. Another gripped her arm too hard. She stumbled, nearly falling, but kept her chin high. Fear roared through her. But something stronger burned beneath it. The same defiance that had made her stand up to her boss at the diner. The same fire that had caught Luca's eye that night in the rain. She wasn't doing this out of weakness. She was doing it because she'd learned what love could make someone brave enough to do. "Where is she?" she demanded. Enzo tilted his head toward a distant shadow. A young woman knelt in the corner, hands tied, bruised but alive. "Isabella," Elena's knees nearly buckled in relief. "See?" Enzo said smoothly. "All you had to do was come. And now?" He took a step closer, his breath reeking of smoke. "We send a message to your precious Dawn." He nodded to one of his men, the cold metal of a gun pressed against her temple. Elena's breath caught, but she didn't move. "Any last words?" Enzo whispered, her heart pounded. Luca's face flashed before her eyes, the storm in his gaze, the warmth in his voice when he said her name. She drew in a trembling breath and whispered, "Tell Luca." "Not to come." Enzo smiled, sharp and cruel. "Too late," he murmured. Outside, engines roared, black cars tearing through the rain. The night burned, engines roared down the rain-slicked pier, black cars fishtailing as gunfire erupted like thunder. The docks became a war zone. Steel, smoke, and vengeance colliding in a symphony of fire. Luca was at the center of it all. His coat billowed behind him as he strode through chaos. Gun blazing, rage carved deep into every line of his face. The men who had touched what was his, who had dared to take her, fell one by one. "Move," he barked, kicking open a warehouse door. The blast of light and sound swallowed him. Inside, the air was thick with gunpowder and betrayal. Men shouted, bullets screamed, and through it all, Luca's mind echoed with one thought. Elena. He'd told her to stay. He'd sworn he'd protect her. And she had walked into hell for him. Now he would burn it to the ground to get her back. He cut through Enzo's guards with precision. Close-range kills, silent fury. A blade to the throat, a gun to the heart. His hands didn't tremble anymore. They couldn't afford to. Somewhere above, a catwalk collapsed, showering sparks. Flames licked across oil drums. The warehouse was becoming an inferno. Through the chaos, he heard it. A scream, her scream. "Elena!" He sprinted toward the sound, bullets tearing past. He vaulted a crate, slammed into a gunman, and drove his knife into the man's chest without slowing. At the far end of the room, he saw her, bound, cornered, surrounded by 3 men with guns drawn. Her hair was plastered to her face, her eyes wide but defiant. "Don't touch her!" Luca roared. Enzo turned, grinning from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come, Romano. You've just traded your empire for a corpse." He raised his gun toward Elena. Luca fired first, a clean shot that tore through Enzo's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The others opened fire. Luca dove, rolling, returning shots that dropped two instantly. The third aimed for Elena. She screamed as the gun went off, and then silence. Elena blinked. The bullet hadn't hit her. She turned, heart stuttering. Luca stood frozen, his face pale, until she realized why. Blood bloomed across his arm, soaking his sleeve. But that wasn't what stopped her breath. A second gunman, hidden behind the crates, aimed again, directly at him. "Luca!" she screamed. He turned, too late. Without thinking, Elena moved. She lunged forward, throwing herself between him and the muzzle flash. The shot echoed through the burning warehouse. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. She stumbled, eyes wide in shock as pain exploded through her side. The world tilted, blurred. Luca caught her before she hit the ground. "No, no, no," he whispered, lowering her carefully, his hands slick with her blood. "Stay with me," her lips parted, breath shallow. "I told you not to come." He pressed his hand to the wound, desperate, frantic. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he rasped, voice cracking. "You don't get to die on me." Gunfire still raged around them, flames clawing up the walls, but the world had narrowed to this. The warmth leaving her body, the way her fingers trembled against his cheek. Somewhere nearby, Enzo laughed weakly. "Poetic, isn't it?" The butcher of Naples brought to his knees by a waitress. Luca's head snapped toward him, eyes burning with the kind of hatred that could end worlds. He raised his gun and fired once, clean, silent. Then he turned back to Elena, cradling her against his chest. "Look at me," he whispered, voice raw. "You're not done. You're not leaving me." "Not again." Her eyes fluttered. The world around them blurred into light and smoke. She tried to speak, but only blood touched her lips. Luca pressed his forehead to hers, shaking. "Please, please." Sirens wailed in the distance, the sound of approaching allies too late. He lifted her, ignoring the pain in his own arm, ignoring the flames that surrounded them. Every step was a battle, every breath a prayer. Outside, his men were shouting, pulling him toward the cars. He laid her across the seat, his hands still pressed to the wound, his voice a litany of broken promises. "Hold on, Bella Mia. You're not going anywhere. Not this time." Her eyelids fluttered once more. She tried to smile, faint, fragile. "Luca," she whispered, and then nothing. Her body went limp in his arms as the car sped into the night, fire reflecting in his tear-streaked face. He gathered her closer, trembling. "Don't leave me," he whispered into her hair. "Not again." The city burned behind them, and in the distance dawn began to rise, cold, cruel, and red as blood. The first sound Elena heard was the faint rhythm of a heart monitor. Steady, patient, alive. She blinked slowly, the world returning in fragments. White walls, the scent of antiseptic, sunlight streaming through half-drawn curtains, the weight of a blanket across her legs, the ache in her side, sharp but real, alive. Then came the other sound, a low, tired voice. "You're awake." She turned her head, every movement cautious, fragile. Luca sat in the chair beside her bed, still dressed in black, though the crisp perfection he always carried was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hair disheveled, his arm bandaged. "He looked human. How long?" she whispered, her throat dry. 3 weeks, he said quietly. "You had surgery twice. The doctors didn't think you'd make it." Her fingers trembled as she touched the bandage near her ribs. "And Isabella?" He exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Safe, she's with family. I made sure of it." She watched him, the man who had once terrified her, who commanded death with a glance, now staring at the floor like he was afraid to breathe too loudly. "Luca," she began softly. "What did you do?" His jaw tightened. His eyes, storm gray, haunted, lifted to hers. "I cleaned the city," he said. "Every man who raised a hand against you is gone. Every traitor, every coward. I burned it all." There was no pride in his voice, no cruelty, only exhaustion, her eyes filled with tears. "Why?" "I was just—" He cut her off, voice breaking. "Because you made me remember I still have a heart." Silence settled between them, heavy and electric. She looked away, swallowing hard. "That's dangerous in your world." He gave a faint smile, one that hurt to see. It always was. Outside, faint sounds drifted in. The soft hum of rain, the distant life of a city that didn't know how close it had come to collapse. He rose slowly, every motion deliberate, and moved to her bedside. He hesitated for a moment before kneeling, the powerful Don reduced to a man stripped bare of armor. His hand hovered over her belly. "May I?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. When his palm settled against her stomach, warmth spread through his trembling fingers. His head bowed, and his breath hitched as if he'd never known such fragility could exist. "You protected him," he murmured. "Even when I couldn't protect you," her throat tightened. "You did." He shook his head slightly, eyes glistening. "No, you protected me. For the first time." Elena saw what lay beneath the legend. Not the ruthless Don. Not the man feared in every corner of Naples. But someone who had buried love under ash and violence, and finally dared to reach for it again. Her hand slid over his. "He'll need both of us," she said quietly. Luca's eyes met hers, steady, fierce, filled with something new. "Then he'll have both of us." A long silence followed. The kind that didn't need words. Only the hum of the machines, the rhythm of two broken hearts beginning to beat in time. Then, it happened. A faint movement beneath his hand. Luca froze. Elena gasped softly. "Did you feel that?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes widened, his breath caught, and then a slow, trembling smile spread across his face. The child kicked again. Stronger this time, a tiny pulse of life between them. He let out a shaky laugh, the sound half a sob. "He knows?" Luca whispered, voice hoarse with awe. "He knows his father's here." Elena's vision blurred. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek, rough with stubble, warm beneath her touch. The world outside the window softened, the rain easing, the first hint of sunlight bleeding through the gray. For a long time, they stayed that way, her in the hospital bed, him kneeling beside her, their hands entwined over the heartbeat of a future neither of them believed they'd deserve. Luca leaned close, his forehead against hers. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever," he whispered. "A reason to stop fighting ghosts." Her voice was barely a breath. "Then stay." He closed his eyes, his lips trembling against her skin. "I will." Outside, the city moved on, unaware that in one quiet room, a man who had built his empire on blood had finally found his salvation in a woman who refused to die. Elena's eyes drifted closed, not from weakness but peace, and as Luca stayed beside her, his hand never leaving her belly, the faint rhythm beneath his palm reminded him life had returned to the man who once ruled death.